My neighbor's daughter revealed she was being used by her mom to flirt with men. Decades older, so I uncovered her mother's disgusting secret and sparked a neighborhood reckoning that destroyed her reputation. I never should have told the parents that their kids could wear whatever they wanted, because it all went to hell. I organized my neighborhood's trick or treating last time, and I never want to do it again because of what some people would make their kids wear. I couldn't believe it because I sent costumes for inspiration, just so that one day the kids would look back at their costumes when they're older and remember just how cute they looked. Everything would have been smooth sailing if not for one mom. I'll just outright say it. I hate her. I absolutely hate Susan. She had the most beautiful and kind kid, Susie, but she was a terrible person. She's the kind of person who would throw back coffee at a barista just because it was too sweet, to make her daughter take photos of her for Facebook and none of her daughter. She's exactly the type to tell you, wow girl, you had a glow up. You were so much ugly before, after not seeing each other for only a week. So it was the night before trick-or-treating when I got the call. It was Susan. She told me her and her child wouldn't be attending because the route is too long for them. I told her that it was no problem and went into my notes app to delete her from the list. But right before I could hang up, she stopped me. Don't you think it was a little irresponsible of you to think that everyone could walk for such a long time? I thought she was pranking me, but her voice was cold and painfully condescending. It's only a quarter of a mile. Only, she interrupted. Just because you need to lose weight doesn't mean the rest of us do. I sighed and plastered on the usual HR voice I did whenever I talked to Susan. I guess we all have our preferences, I exclaimed before hanging up. Good riddance. So there I am on Halloween, doing a quick head count of the kids before leaving, and who pulls up on my driveway? None other than Susan herself. She was dressed in an extremely inappropriate maid costume, with a dress so low cut it could have passed for a long t-shirt. Meanwhile, her child, Susie, is hiding behind her legs and wearing a maid costume that looked just like hers, except the top was even tighter. I just stared at her, wondering what the F she was thinking. Hey, eyes up here! Susan yelled with a smirk on her face. Sorry, but some of us actually have curves to show, she added. That's when Susie beckoned her mom to bend down beside her, because she wanted to whisper in her ear. Mom, I don't feel comfortable, I heard her say. Susan whispered back, pain is beauty, and the sooner you learn that the better. Well, I wasn't going to just stand by and watch a mother do that to her daughter. So I grabbed one of my daughter Isabella's Halloween costumes from the year before and asked if she wanted it. Susan tried to intervene, but I looked her right in the eyes and told her that if she made her daughter uncomfortable in front of me again, I would cause a scene with all the other moms. That shut her up fast. The rest of the trick-or-treating went smoothly, except for Susan, who was lagging behind us at the very back. It was then that I realized why she had made her and her daughter both wear promiscuous little outfits, because she was flirting with every dad she passed, regardless of whether they were with their wife and kids or not. But even worse, she joked about how Susie was even hotter than most of the moms here, to the grown men. At first I tried to wave it off as some dumb parent comment. That was until I noticed Susan and her daughter walking alongside a dad across the street from us. I know I should have just left her alone to live her life, but sometimes you just can't fight the mama bear instinct. And this situation was one of those times, because while Susan was safe with the mom of her best friend, I walked across the street when they weren't paying attention and staggered a few feet away. Your son is the perfect match for my daughter, I heard Susan explain, while batting her eyes like they could help her fly away. I glanced over at the son. He was no younger than 11. Meanwhile, Susie was 5 years older. The whole thing made me sick, especially how naturally flirting seemed to come to Susie, who was directly mimicking her mother's actions, like she had done it dozens of times before. I dropped in a few comments joking about how Susan has a husband. She doesn't, until the dad got uncomfortable enough to walk away. And as a child carer, I deal with these types of parents on a daily basis. So that evening, after everyone went home, I confronted her. Or rather, her daughter confronted me. Why did you do that? I almost had another boyfriend, she yelled. Another? I asked her what she was talking about, and that's when she said, Mommy told me my last boyfriend got divorced, so now I'm single again. The color drained from my face. How old was he? I asked, voice shaking. IDK like 30? He bought me new earrings every day. Susan immediately rushed over and grabbed her daughter. She yanked Susie's hand and started dragging her toward their car. I stood frozen for a moment, watching Susan's heels click against my driveway as she practically hauled her daughter away. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and texted my husband about what just happened. The words kept echoing in my mind. 30 years old, bought earrings every day. My stomach churned. Within minutes, my phone buzzed. Susan had already texted me. Keep your mouth shut about my parenting or I'll make sure everyone knows about your secrets. I stared at the message, confused. What secrets? She had nothing on me, but the threat was clear. 20 minutes later, my husband walked through the door to find me sitting at the kitchen table, still shaking. He set down his briefcase and rushed over. I explained everything. The costume, the flirting, Susie's confession about the boyfriend. His face went through several expressions before settling on skepticism. He suggested maybe I misunderstood. Maybe Susie was just confused or making things up. His doubt hit me like cold water. I replayed Susie's exact words for him, watching his expression slowly change. But even then, he seemed more concerned about getting involved than about what I'd heard. Isabella wandered into the kitchen, still wearing her witch costume. She asked why Susie left so early, mentioning casually that her friend often talked about her special friends who gave her presents. My blood ran cold. I sent Isabella to wash up for bed, trying to keep my voice steady. I needed to talk to someone who would understand. Maria worked at the local elementary school as a counselor. She was a mandated reporter. I dialed her number despite the late hour. The phone rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. I hung up without leaving a message. Sleep wouldn't come. At midnight, I opened Facebook on my laptop. The neighborhood group already had a new post from Susan, complaining about the judgmental host who tried to control what children wear. Several parents had already commented, some defending me, others agreeing that parents should decide their kids' costumes. I scrolled through Susan's profile, taking screenshots of everything, photos, posts, comments. At 2 a.m., something strange happened. Susan's photos started disappearing. One by one, every picture of Susie vanished from her timeline. I frantically screenshotted what I could, but within minutes, years of photos were gone. My cursor hovered over the message button. Susan was online. She could see I was active. Before I could decide what to do, a notification popped up. Susan had blocked me on Facebook, then Instagram, then everywhere else I could think of. The digital door slammed shut. The next morning came too quickly. From my kitchen window, I watched Susan drop Susie at the bus stop. Despite the warm November weather, Susie wore a turtleneck that covered her neck completely. Susan stood with the other parents, speaking loudly about overprotective neighbors and people who don't mind their own business. A few parents glanced my way through their windows. Rachel called me an hour later. Her daughter was in Susie's kindergarten class. She sounded worried, explaining that her daughter had mentioned Susie talking about modeling and getting paid for it. The other kids thought it sounded fun, and now several wanted to be models too. Rachel asked if I knew anything about it. I chose my words carefully, suggesting she might want to keep an eye on the situation. I spent the morning going through old photos from neighborhood events. In one from a summer BBQ 3 months ago, I found something. A man's hand rested on Susie's shoulder. You could only see his arm and torso, the face carefully cropped out, but the hand wore an expensive watch watch and gold rings. Susie wore small gold earrings I'd never noticed before. I saved the photo to multiple locations. That afternoon at the grocery store, an older woman approached me in the cereal aisle. I recognized her as Susan's mother. She lived 2 streets over. She glanced around nervously before speaking quietly. She said she'd been worried about her granddaughter too, but Susan wouldn't listen to her concerns. She'd tried talking to Susan about the men coming around, about the gifts, about how Susie was being dressed. Susan had cut her off from seeing Susie except at public events. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she quickly walked away. At home, my husband still thought we should stay out of it. He pointed out we barely knew them, that accusations like this could ruin us if we were wrong. The doubt in his voice stung. I was alone in this, at least at home. I went through my phone, finding old text conversations with Susan. 6 months ago, she'd asked if I knew any photography friends who might want to take pictures of Susie. She specifically mentioned people who pay well for kid portraits. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it. Lots of parents did photo shoots. Now the request read differently. Over the next few days, Susan's campaign against me intensified. She told mutual friends I was obsessed with her and Susie, suggesting I had mental health issues. She hinted at jealousy, saying I couldn't stand that her daughter was prettier than mine. Some neighbors started avoiding me. Work became impossible. I taught preschool, and suddenly every interaction with children reminded me of Susie. I researched signs of child exploitation during my breaks, missing an important staff meeting deadline because I'd fallen down an internet rabbit hole of warning signs and red flags. Everything I read matched what I'd seen. I tried one more avenue, the school. I carefully approached the guidance counselor, framing my concerns as general worries about a child in the neighborhood. The counselor, Mrs. Peterson, listened politely, but dismissed my concerns. She mentioned that she knew Susan socially, that she was going through a tough divorce, and we shouldn't add to her stress. As she spoke, I noticed her earrings, small gold hoops that looked remarkably similar to ones I'd seen Susie wear. My heart sank. That night, I created a fake social media account with a generic name. I needed to see what Susan was posting. It didn't take long to find her in several child modeling opportunity groups. Parents posted their kids' photos, and agents would comment with offers. Susan was active in all of them. The next day, while Susan was at work, I happened to drive past the elementary school during pickup time. I saw Susie's grandmother there, trying to pick her up. The teacher shook her head, checking a list. The grandmother gestured frantically, but security approached and escorted her to her car. Susan had restricted the pickup list to only herself. Over the following week, 3 different moms mentioned strange things to me. At the park, Jennifer said Susie had offered to introduce her to men who buy presents. At school pickup, another mother mentioned Susie had told her daughter about special photo time that earned money. A third said Susie had tried to teach her daughter how to pose pretty for grown-ups. The pattern was undeniable. The memories hit me hard that night. Years ago, I'd taken mandatory reporter training for my Sunday school teaching. The grooming patterns, the gradual normalization, the gifts, the secrecy, it all matched what they'd taught us to watch for. I'd been trained for this, but facing it in real life felt different. My phone rang late that evening. The caller ID showed Emma, Susan's sister. I'd met her once 2 years ago before she'd suddenly stopped coming to family events. Her voice shook as she explained she'd heard about the Halloween incident from their mother. She said there was a reason she didn't let Susan near her kids anymore. She'd seen things, noticed patterns. Susan had always used Susie for attention from men, even as a baby. The gifts, the money, it went back years. Emma spoke quickly, afraid of being overheard. The next morning, Susan confronted Emma in the school parking lot. I watched from my car as Susan screamed at her sister, threatening consequences if she spoke to me again. Emma drove away in tears. Other parents pretended not to notice, but I saw them exchange glances. That afternoon, Rachel decided to ask Susan directly about the modeling Susie kept mentioning. She approached Susan at school pickup, keeping her tone friendly and curious. Susan's response was immediate and vicious. She accused Rachel of being perverted, of having an unhealthy interest in her daughter. Her voice rose loud enough for everyone to hear. Parents pulled their children closer and hurried to their cars. Rachel stood there, shocked and humiliated. The battle lines were drawn. Susan had made herself clear. Anyone who questioned her would face her wrath, but now others were starting to see what I saw. The foundation was cracking, and Susan knew it. She'd removed the photos, restricted access to Susie, and launched her campaign against me. But she couldn't hide everything. The truth has a way of surfacing, especially when a child's safety is at stake. That night, as I lay in bed replaying everything, I made a decision. I wouldn't back down. I couldn't. Somewhere in this town, a 5-year-old girl was being failed by every adult in her life, except for a handful of concerned mothers, and a grandmother locked out of her life. The system had failed. The school had failed. Even my own husband doubted me. But I'd seen the evidence. I'd heard Susie's words, and I knew that sometimes protecting a child means standing alone against someone who knows exactly how to manipulate the narrative. The war for Susie's safety had begun, and Susan had fired the first shots. But I had something she didn't expect. The determination of a mother who'd seen too much to look away. Susan's next move came through my workplace. The following Monday, my coworker Tom mentioned meeting someone new at a coffee shop over the weekend. He described an attractive single mother who seemed interested in him. My stomach dropped when he showed me her profile picture. Susan had already infiltrated my professional circle. Within days, Susan appeared at our office holiday party as Tom's +1. She wore a conservative dress, playing the role of demure single mother perfectly. She made rounds through the room, subtly mentioning her struggles raising Susie alone, how some neighbors made her life difficult with false accusations. She knew exactly which details to share, just enough to plant seeds of doubt about my stability without directly naming me. I documented everything in a private journal that night, recognizing the isolation tactics from my psychology training. Susan was systematically cutting off my support systems, turning my workplace into another battlefield. Tom started giving me strange looks during meetings, and other colleagues began keeping their distance. Isabella's teacher pulled me aside after school that week. She showed me drawings from art class. Susie had drawn pictures of herself in different outfits with stick figures of men around her. The teacher found them concerning but wasn't sure what to make of them. One drawing showed Susie in a dress with dollar signs floating above her head. Another depicted what looked like a camera and bright lights. The teacher had saved them, unsure whether to report anything officially. Tom approached me privately the next day, looking uncomfortable. He explained that Susan had suggested bringing Susie over for a play date at his apartment, mentioning she'd bring special outfits for photos since he had such nice lighting. Something about it felt wrong to him. He'd made an excuse about being busy, but Susan kept pushing, sending him photos of Susie in various poses. His gut told him to stay away. That evening, I noticed my car door slightly ajar in the driveway. Nothing appeared missing, but the unsettled feeling prompted me to back up all my documentation to cloud storage immediately. Every screenshot, every photo, every note. I created multiple copies across different platforms. The police visit came 3 days later. An officer arrived at my door, explaining they'd received a complaint about harassment. He knew Susan personally. Their kids played soccer together. He suggested this seemed like mommy drama and advised me to let it go. He took no formal report, just warned me about the consequences of false accusations. His dismissive tone made it clear where his loyalties lay. I started building trust with other mothers one by one. During playground conversations, conversations, I'd carefully mention my concerns without seeming obsessive. 3 mothers, Catherine, Benji, and Min, admitted they'd noticed troubling things too. Catherine's daughter had come home asking if she could model for money like Susie. Benji mentioned seeing Susan at the mall with Susie and an older man who kept buying them things. Min had overheard Susie telling other kids about her special friends who gave better presents than Santa. Late-night research revealed more pieces of the puzzle. Susan's ex-husband had lost custody 3 years ago. The court records were sealed, but public records showed he'd fought hard for joint custody. His current address was just 2 towns over. I found his mother's obituary from last year. She'd been a child welfare advocate. The pieces started forming a pattern. Through Emma, I learned the ex-husband's mother was actually still alive. The obituary was for his stepmother. His biological mother lived locally and had tried to maintain contact with Susie. She reached out through Emma, sharing that during the custody battle, she'd tried telling the judge about the men Susan brought around. Her testimony had been dismissed as a biased grandmother trying to help her son. I maintained composure at school events despite Susan's provocations. When she loudly discussed her dating life near me, I simply smiled and walked away. When she made snide comments about nosy neighbors, I didn't react. Other parents noticed my restraint. They saw Susan's increasingly desperate attempts to provoke me and drew their own conclusions. The urgency intensified when Susie's grandmother mentioned the custody case would be reheard in 6 weeks. Susan's ex-husband had new representation and was fighting for emergency custody based on changed circumstances. The grandmother couldn't say more, but her eyes held hope for the first time. Jennifer pulled me aside at school pickup with disturbing news. Her brother was a photographer, and Susan had approached him about having Susie model. She'd been oddly specific about the types of photos she wanted, nothing explicitly inappropriate, but pushing boundaries. She'd mentioned other photographers paid much more for artistic shots. Jennifer's brother had declined and warned his sister. The cracks in Susan's facade showed during a mom's night out. After several drinks, she bragged about never having to worry about money despite being a single mom. She mentioned the gifts and trips men gave her, how Susie was her little gold mine. The other mothers exchanged worried glances. Susan's mask had slipped, revealing the ugly truth beneath. When Susan discovered I'd declined her peace offering of having Susie model for Isabella's birthday party photos, she cornered me in the school parking lot. Her voice was low and threatening as she promised to destroy me if I didn't stop interfering. I recorded the interaction on my phone, adding it to my growing collection of evidence. Susan's grandmother and Emma began coordinating privately. They met at coffee shops in neighboring towns, planning how to help Susie. Emma shared that Susan's pattern of using Susie for money had started when Susie was barely 2. There had always been uncles who bought expensive gifts, men who paid for cute pictures of the toddler. I discovered Susan's financial pattern through careful observation. New boyfriends always appeared just before rent was due, or when expensive items appeared in Susan's social media posts. The timing was too consistent to be coincidental. She'd refined her approach over years, knowing exactly how to extract maximum benefit while maintaining plausible deniability. Susan's control network was smaller than it appeared. Beyond Tom and a few enablers who believed her victim narrative, most people kept their distance. Her power came from fear and manipulation rather than genuine support. Once I understood this, her tactics became less effective. Isabella came home from school with a small gold bracelet, saying Susie had given it to her as a friendship present. My heart sank as I examined it. Real gold, with an adult sizing adjusted smaller. The clasp had 14 karat engraved on it. This was expensive jewelry, not something a 5-year-old should have access to. I photographed it from every angle before storing it safely. Rachel stood by me despite Susan's threats to spread lies about Rachel's marriage. She'd seen enough to know who the real threat was. We began coordinating, ensuring our children were never alone with Susie, not out of cruelty, but for everyone's protection. We couldn't save Susie directly, but we could prevent our children from being pulled into whatever Susan was orchestrating. Our partnership strengthened as we documented everything together. 2 witnesses were harder to discredit than 1. We compared notes, verified each other's observations, and provided mutual support when Susan's attacks intensified. Despite opportunities to retaliate or plant evidence, we maintained ethical boundaries. The truth was damning enough without embellishment. During the school play, Susan let another piece slip. Forced to interact with me due to our daughter's roles, she mentioned offhandedly that her ex-boyfriend had been good with monthly support until he'd gotten selfish. The casual way she discussed using relationships for financial gain chilled me. She didn't even realize she'd revealed her mindset. Susie's grandmother confirmed the bracelet matched pieces her granddaughter had shown her last year. She'd tried to ask where they came from, but Susan had immediately restricted her access. The grandmother had photos on her phone, the same style, the same 14K marking. The evidence was mounting. 2 of Susan's enabler friends began distancing themselves after witnessing her explosive reaction to simple questions about Susie's modeling career. They'd believed Susan's story about jealous neighbors until they saw her rage firsthand. The careful image she'd cultivated was crumbling. Other parents began implementing protective measures without formal coordination. Playdates with Susie dried up. Birthday party invitations stopped coming. Parents found excuses to avoid interactions with Susan. The community's collective instinct to protect children kicked in, creating an informal barrier around the danger they sensed. My husband finally understood the gravity of the situation. He used his business connections to research Susan's background, finding a trail of short-lived relationships and frequent moves. The pattern suggested someone who burned bridges and moved on before consequences caught up. He apologized for doubting me and threw his full support behind protecting Susie. The PTA meeting became a turning point. When confronted about approaching multiple parents about Susie modeling, Susan's response was unhinged. She accused me of being sexually obsessed with her daughter, her voice rising to a shriek. The room fell silent. Parents who'd been neutral saw her true nature in that moment. The wild accusations, the inappropriate language, the lack of boundaries, it all became clear. Meeting attendees sided with me through their silence and subsequent actions. No one defended Susan. No one validated her accusations. Instead, they quietly ensured she was excluded from future event planning. Her attempt to flip the narrative had backfired spectacularly. Susan's options narrowed as her reputation spread. Babysitters became unavailable when she called. The usual network of parents who helped each other with pickups and emergencies closed ranks against her. She'd isolated herself through her own actions. The breakthrough came when Susan's ex-husband's lawyer contacted me. There had been a previous CPS investigation 2 years ago regarding an older boyfriend who'd shown unusual interest in then 3-year-old Susie. The case had been closed due to insufficient evidence, but the pattern was documented. The lawyer was building a case for the custody rehearing. I made sure Isabella and the other children understood body safety without mentioning Susie specifically. We had age-appropriate conversations about boundaries, about adults who might ask children to keep secrets, about the difference between safe and unsafe attention. The children absorbed these lessons naturally, adding another layer of protection. 7 families formed an unofficial support network. We shared information about Susan's movements, warned each other when she attempted to infiltrate new social circles, and ensured someone was always watching when she appeared at school events. The network operated through quiet cooperation rather than formal organization. Susan's attempts to recruit new friends in neighboring online communities failed. Her reputation preceded her through the efficient suburban parent network. Social media groups quietly warned each other. Playdates were politely declined. The isolation she'd tried to impose on others had become her own reality. A church nursery worker witnessed Susan instructing Susie to be extra friendly to a wealthy-looking father during Sunday school pickup. The way Susan positioned Susie encouraged her to hug the man, to compliment his watch. It was coaching in real time. The nursery worker reported it to church leadership, adding another piece to the growing documentation. My reputation rebuilt as parents realized the truth. Those who'd initially believed Susan's lies about my obsession saw the pattern of her behavior. They understood I'd been protecting not just Susie, but all their children from someone who viewed kids as commodities. Apologies came quietly, a nod at pickup, an invitation to coffee, inclusion in group texts again. The bracelet Isabella received was tested by a jeweler friend. Real gold, worth several $100s, with an inscription inside, "To my special girl, RM." The jeweler noted it was an adult piece, likely a girlfriend's bracelet resized. He provided written documentation of his assessment, adding professional weight to our evidence. With the custody hearing approaching in 2 weeks, Susan's behavior became increasingly erratic. She showed up at school events overdressed and overly made up, desperately seeking new male attention. Her attempts to charm single fathers became transparent and uncomfortable. The community watched with a mixture of pity and revulsion. Multiple witnesses agreed to testify at the custody hearing. Parents, teachers, nursery workers, all had observed concerning behavior. The documented pattern spanning years couldn't be dismissed as neighborhood gossip. The truth had momentum now. I realized Susie's safety depended entirely on her father regaining custody. The system had failed her before, but with community support and documented evidence, there was hope. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every professional observation built toward this chance at justice. Despite everything, I maintained grace during forced interactions with Susan. When she tried to provoke confrontations, I responded with calm politeness. When she spread lies, I let the truth speak through my actions. The high road was exhausting, but necessary. Susie needed adults who could navigate the system professionally. The entire school community had shifted into protective mode. Teachers kept extra watch during recess. Parents ensured Susie was never alone with adults at school events. The secretary documented Susan's erratic pickup times and inappropriate comments. Without formal coordination, everyone did their part to create a safety net. Truth prevailed as even Susan's last supporters couldn't deny the mounting evidence. The few who'd clung to her victim narrative quietly distanced themselves. Reality had become too obvious to ignore. Susan's carefully constructed house of cards was collapsing. Emma gained temporary guardianship while custody was determined. It happened quickly. Susan had left Susie with Emma for a weekend and simply didn't return on time. Emma seized the opportunity to file emergency paperwork. With community support and documentation of Susan's instability, the court granted temporary custody. It was the first real victory in protecting Susie. Susan's last desperate attempt to control the narrative came through social media. She created multiple posts about kidnapping and conspiracy, tagging local news outlets. But the screenshots of her previous posts surfaced immediately. Years of inappropriate photos, comments about Susie being hot, references to gifts from men. Her own digital footprint destroyed her credibility. The pattern was undeniable now. Multiple witnesses, physical evidence, documented behavior spanning years, professional concerns from teachers and childcare workers, it all painted a clear picture. Susan had systematically exploited her daughter for financial gain, normalizing inappropriate relationships and grooming behaviors. As Susan lost her job after multiple parents called her employer with concerns, the consequences of her actions finally caught up. The careful balance she'd maintained for years, playing the victim while victimizing her daughter, had crumbled. Without income from her job or her usual sources, she faced real consequences for the first time. A core group of parents committed to supporting Susie through the transition. We organized meal trains for Emma, offered babysitting help, and ensured Susie had normal childhood experiences during this upheaval. The community that had failed to protect her initially was determined to help her heal. My courage in speaking up inspired 2 other mothers to report suspicious situations in their own lives. One had noticed concerning behavior from a coach. Another had questions about a family friend's interest in children. The ripple effect of protecting one child extended to protecting others. Armed with community testimony and documented evidence, Susie's father's lawyer built an ironclad case. The pattern of exploitation, the testimony from multiple witnesses, the physical evidence, it all supported emergency custody change. For the first time in years, Susie had a real chance at a normal childhood. The week before the hearing, Susan appeared to accept defeat. She stopped showing up at school events, stopped posting on social media, stopped trying to recruit new allies. The eerie quiet felt like the calm before a storm. Those of us who'd been watching knew better than to trust this apparent surrender. The school counselor finally believed me when Susie disclosed details about her various boyfriends during a routine check-in. The counselor's hands shook as she documented Susie's matter-of-fact descriptions of adult men who bought her presents and took special photos. Her report validated everything I'd documented, creating an official record that couldn't be dismissed as neighborhood gossip. Susan's ex-husband's mother arrived at my door carrying a small box. Inside were journals she'd saved from Susie's visits, pages filled with drawings and attempts at writing about her special friends. The grandmother had preserved them, knowing someday they'd matter. Each page strengthened the custody case. The community's unanimous support became evident when the ex-husband's lawyer requested character statements. 47 parents submitted letters detailing their observations and concerns. Even those who'd initially sided with Susan wrote about witnessing her unhinged behavior and inappropriate comments about her daughter. Susan launched her counterattack through social media, posting edited recordings that made me sound obsessed and unstable. She'd spliced together voice messages and phone calls, creating a narrative where I appeared to be stalking her family. The clip spread through local parent groups within hours. My reputation took an immediate hit. Parents who'd supported me began questioning whether they'd misjudged the situation. Some suggested I'd manipulated them, that maybe Susan had been the victim all along. The carefully edited audio was convincing enough to plant doubt. The isolation returned swiftly. Coffee invitations were withdrawn. Text messages went unanswered. At school pickup, parents avoided eye contact. Even my husband suggested we should step back. Let the legal system handle everything without our involvement. The gaslighting was working. I stood alone in my kitchen, watching through the window as neighbors gathered at Susan's house. She'd invited them for an emergency meeting about the harassment campaign against her. Through her living room window, I could see her gesturing dramatically, probably spinning tales of persecution. Despite the pressure, I refused to recant my concerns. The evidence existed regardless of Susan's digital manipulation. Susie's safety mattered more than my reputation. I prepared myself for whatever came next, knowing the custody hearing would reveal the truth. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and humid. I dressed carefully, choosing conservative clothes that conveyed seriousness. My hands trembled as I applied makeup, knowing this day would determine a child's future. The courthouse loomed ahead as I parked, its concrete facade imposing against the cloudy sky. Inside, the hallway buzzed with nervous energy. Susan's ex-husband sat with his lawyer, reviewing documents. Emma held Susie's hand near the water fountain. Susan hadn't hadn't arrived yet, but her presence felt imminent. Other witnesses clustered in small groups, whispering anxiously. Susan swept in 20 minutes late, wearing a demure suit that transformed her appearance. She'd styled herself as the persecuted mother, complete with minimal makeup and a small cross necklace I'd never seen her wear before. Her lawyer, an aggressive-looking man in an expensive suit, flanked her protectively. The bathroom became an unexpected battleground. I'd stepped inside to collect myself when Susan followed. We faced each other in the harsh fluorescent light, the pretense finally dropping. Her mask slipped as she hissed about her needs, how Susie enjoyed the attention, how I'd ruined their comfortable life. The admission confirmed everything. Susie's teacher arrived just as we entered the courtroom, carrying a thick folder. She documented concerning behaviors throughout the school year. Susie's inappropriate knowledge, her attempts to model for male teachers, her offers to introduce classmates to men who gave gifts. The teacher's professional assessment carried weight. The judge called the hearing to order, his expression grave. Both lawyers presented opening statements while I sat in the witness section, my pulse racing. The moment arrived when they called witnesses. I had to decide whether to testify despite potential legal consequences from Susan's threats. I took the stand, swearing to tell the truth. My voice remained steady as I recounted everything: the Halloween incident, Susie's confession, the pattern of exploitation, the community's observations. I presented the bracelet evidence, the photographs, the documented timeline. Susan's lawyer attacked my credibility, but I held firm. The judge's expression shifted as more witnesses testified. Teachers, parents, childcare workers, each added another piece to the disturbing puzzle. When Susie's counselor read her disclosure statements, several people in the gallery gasped. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge ordered an immediate recess, then returned with his decision. Temporary custody would transfer to Susie's father immediately. The courtroom erupted as Susan lunged toward her daughter, screaming about kidnapping and conspiracy. Security officers restrained her while she threatened Sewer's life if they took her baby. The manipulation was transparent. Even her own lawyer looked uncomfortable. The judge ordered a psychological evaluation and supervised visitation only. Susie clung to her father, finally safe from the woman who treated her as a commodity rather than a child. Outside the courthouse, Susan approached me one final time. Her carefully constructed image had shattered completely. She sent a text minutes later, a simple message blaming me for ruining her life, before blocking my number. The war was over. The community rallied around Susie and her father in the following days. Meal trains appeared. Offers of babysitting flooded in. Parents who doubted me apologized quietly, ashamed they'd fallen for Susan's manipulation. The neighborhood began healing from the collective trauma. 3 months passed. I glimpsed Susie at the spring carnival, laughing with genuine joy as her father pushed her on the swings. She wore age-appropriate clothes and played like a normal child. Her therapy was progressing well, according to Emma, who maintained a relationship with her niece. The investigation into Susie's boyfriends continued quietly. When Susie felt safe enough to share more details, authorities identified at least one man who'd paid Susan for access to her daughter. The legal process would be long, but justice was finally possible. Susan faced multiple charges related to child endangerment and exploitation. Her probation terms included mandatory parenting classes, psychological treatment, and no unsupervised contact with any minor. The woman who'd weaponized her daughter's innocence finally faced consequences. Other parents approached me throughout the year, sharing their own concerns about suspicious situations. My willingness to stand alone had inspired others to speak up. 2 coaches were removed from youth sports. A problematic daycare worker was investigated. The ripple effect continued. The bracelet remained in evidence, a tangible reminder of how close Susie had come to worse exploitation. The jeweler who'd examined it testified that several similar pieces had been resized at various shops, suggesting a pattern of gifts from adult men to a child. Susan's former enablers quietly admitted they'd seen warning signs but hadn't wanted to get involved. They'd chosen comfortable blindness over a child's safety. Their shame was palpable at school events, where they now watched their own children more carefully. My marriage strengthened through the ordeal. My husband's initial skepticism had transformed into fierce protectiveness. He understood now that sometimes standing up for what's right means risking everything. We talked more openly about protecting our own children. Isabella processed the experience through play therapy. She'd lost a friend, but gained important lessons about body safety and trusting instincts. Her drawings showed increasing understanding that not all adults could be trusted, a sad but necessary awareness. The school implemented new protocols for recognizing potential exploitation. Teachers received additional training. Parents were required to attend seminars on protecting children from predators who might be hiding in plain sight. Susie's case became a catalyst for positive change. Susan's house stood empty after the bank foreclosed. Without her usual income sources and facing legal bills, she'd lost everything. Neighbors reported seeing her leave town in a borrowed car, presumably starting over somewhere else. The system would track her now. Emma shared updates when we met for coffee. Susie was thriving in her father's care, slowly reclaiming her childhood. She'd stopped offering to introduce people to men. She no longer posed inappropriately for cameras. The grooming behaviors were fading with consistent therapy and protection. The custody arrangement became permanent after a year. Susan's parental rights were severely restricted, allowing only supervised visits at a court-approved facility. Susie had asked to see her mother less and less, finding stability in her new life. I returned to my normal routine, teaching preschool and organizing neighborhood events. But I watched more carefully now, trusted my instincts more readily. The experience had changed me fundamentally. Evil could wear a familiar face and speak in a neighbor's voice. The following Halloween arrived with crisp air and excited children. I organized the trick-or-treating route again, this time with stricter costume guidelines and more parental oversight. Parents thanked me for creating a safe environment, understanding now why such vigilance mattered. Susie appeared at my door with her father, dressed as a princess, a real child's princess, not a sexualized version. She smiled genuinely, her eyes bright with normal childhood excitement. She'd chosen the costume herself from age-appropriate options. The contrast from the previous year was profound. I handed her candy, fighting back tears. This child had been saved by a community that finally chose to see what was happening. Her innocence had been damaged but not destroyed. With continued support and therapy, she had a chance at a normal life. The neighborhood had learned a difficult lesson about the dangers of looking away, of choosing comfort over children's safety. We discovered that predators don't always lurk in shadows. Sometimes they stand at PTA meetings and host playdates. Sometimes they're mothers who see their children as commodities. That night, I watched costumed children race between houses, their laughter echoing through the streets. Parents chatted in driveways, but with more awareness now. We'd lost our naive trust, but gained something more valuable: the knowledge that protecting children requires constant vigilance and the courage to act on uncomfortable truths. 1 year later, the community had transformed. We looked out for each other's children with informed eyes. We asked uncomfortable questions when something seemed wrong. We'd learned that silence enables predators while speaking up saves lives. Susie's case had changed us all. The little girl who'd once been dressed inappropriately and offered to strangers now played freely at the park, her father always nearby but not hovering. She was in therapy, working through trauma no child should experience, but she laughed now, real laughter, not the practiced charm her mother had taught her. Susan served her probation in another state, reportedly working minimum wage and living in a small apartment. The glamorous lifestyle built on her daughter's exploitation had crumbled completely.